Hi, thanks for listening to Crafting Human and being part of our creative tribe. If this conversation resonates with you, please share the episode. Liking and subscribing helps me to keep telling the stories of the creatives who bring soul into our world. If you want me to dive deeper on anything discussed today, let me know in the comments. I'd love to bring those conversations to you in future episodes. Now, on with the show. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Crafting Human. I am so delighted for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for many, many months. What I'd like to do is just give you a level, kind of a context of today's conversation. We are living in a time where nearly everything is designed for speed: faster growth, faster output, faster results. We've learned how to scale companies, optimize systems, and now we train machines to generate endless possibilities in seconds. But human beings are not machines. We are sensory, emotional, relational, meaning making people with a spirit and a very deep biological need for beauty, expression, and experience. And while many of us know how to produce, we struggle with how to tend to our humanity without slipping into kind of like a mechanized way of living. And oftentimes, I can definitely say that for myself, we neglect nurturing our inner worlds, cultivating our imagination, and developing our capacity for creativity, awe, and connection. And as you might know, I'm an interior designer, and these things are so essential to how I translate and create an experience for my own clients and the world at large. All of this is also connected to our nervous system, and it's a very complex topic, but also really just riveting and compelling. And my guests today, Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross, are co-authors of the New York Times bestseller book, Your Brain on Art. And I'm just so excited because I feel like in today's conversation, they're going to help us remember something both ancient and revolutionary: that art is not decoration, it's not an extra, it's essential. And they literally say on their website, the arts in its countless forms transforms our minds and bodies. So I'm super excited to introduce you today to Susan and Ivy. I'm just going to take a really quick second to give a background about who they are. Susan is the founder and director of the International Arts and Mind Lab Center of Applied Neuroaesthetics at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, where science and the arts come together to understand how aesthetic experiences shape the body, brain, and well-being. Ivy is Chief Design Officer for Consumer Devices at Google, exploring how color, materials, and multi-sensory experiences influence how we feel, think, and connect. Thank you both so much. I know your schedules are incredibly busy, and for having this conversation with me, I feel like is a really foundational conversation to the mission and the DNA of Crafting Human. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to start our conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you for creating such an important podcast. We love the name. My two favorite words, craft and human, together.
Well, after everything that I've just shared, I'd love to start by asking, what does being fully human even mean to you both? And I know, Susan, you come from the science and neuroscience background, and Ivy, you have this real creative background, but really kind of at the heart of it, when I read your book, you're both. And so I just would love to hear from both of your perspectives. What does it mean and look like for you to be fully human?
You want to go first, Susan?
Sure. So it's a great question. I think, we come into this world and we are, creatures. We are, flesh and blood and bone, and we create who we become based on our experiences, right? And the way that happens is through neuroplasticity, and the way our bodies respond to the worlds that we're in. But we're malleable, right? We're adaptable. We break and we mend. We are euphoric and we grieve. And I think it's the vulnerability and the tenderness. And I'll also say the finite nature of the time that we're here on this planet that represents humanity and what it really means to be human. And I guess at its core is that we are feelers, right? We feel, and feeling drives everything we do at a conscious and mostly at an unconscious level.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so
Yeah,
true.
I was going to say when I feel fully human is when all my sensory systems are on. I feel incredibly alive or alivened. And I think, you know, being human means living the life that only you can live, like figuring out what you're here, what your story is, and really going deeper into that aspect as opposed to um, just being transactional in your life, but to take emotional risks, dive in, feel things, and like Susan was saying, and we have a great quote in the book from Julie Bolte Taylor that says, "We think we're thinking beings that have learned to feel. We're actually feeling beings that have learned to think." And when we both first read that, it was like, oh my God, that's our mantra. And it just changes your lens because she's absolutely right. The more I got to learn the science through Susan, the more you realize that we are designed, uh, bodies are designed to be feeling beings. And then we learn to think. But we walk around, I think, thinking from the neck up and forgetting how to feel, and that the whole body, and that's our birthright. We're literally designed that way and we're not using it.
Yeah, that is so good. I mean, the whole concept of I mean, and I think right now we're even seeing it, these aspects of how like the symptoms of us living kind of this disconnected, disembodied lives. And it's interesting. I mentioned it right before earlier in the call, Ivy, my husband has been going through a similar journey of reconnecting, you know, not just living from head up, right? But living fully embodied. And what I mean, and it's been super fun for me as well to be doing this podcast and realizing, gosh, I thought I was fully, I'm pretty well in tune with myself. I'm a creative and all these kind of things. But just even as I said at the intro, not it's funny we get so into the do that we do forget what it means to just take that moment to pause. And certainly I can say that for myself, to pause and be intentional about being versus just doing. So I loved that quote too when I read that in the book. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so good." I wrote it down and I have a little sticky post-it of it on my bedroom vanity mirror. So as I'm getting ready in the morning, I'm like, "I'm a feeling, I'm a being, I'm not doing," and whatever. It's my little
You know,
my
the
my fun quotes.
the
Yes.
other thing about that I want to say that I think is really critically important, and I mean, this has been it's been bubbling up in a lot of places lately, is because we feel we have this amazing ability to have agency and to act. And
Yeah.
so we are not victims unless we choose to be. We can really activate change in the world, in ourselves, in our families. It's not even just learning, it's transformation, right? It's this experience of moving and changing. And I think more than ever right now, these aesthetic and arts experiences are these things that we can activate. Like, I love the fact that people are singing in Minneapolis, that they're singing
Mhm.
to to soothe their souls. They're
Mhm.
singing to heal, but they're also singing for entunement and entrainment and connection to each other, and against something that they can't control. And I think that's agency. That's true agency. And I think the work that we're doing really is starting to name these evolutionary imperatives that are our birthright. And I mean, I often say we are wired for the arts, right? That's what we're wired for. And we forgot it because we became so transactional. And we're remembering because we need it to survive individually, but I think we also need it to survive as a species.
Yeah, and talking about species, we spoke. There's still 500 indigenous tribes, and we spoke to someone from the Hopi tribe and a number of others. But in those times and still today, the tribes, they didn't have a word for art. We sang, we danced, we told stories, we did graphics in caves because that's
Mhm.
the way we lived,
That's
and
just
we
the
didn't
life. Yeah.
that was life, and so
Yeah.
that proves that that's our natural inclination of
Mhm.
how to it is our nature to be within nature that way, singing, dancing, drawing, telling stories. And
Yeah.
that's why during troubled times, I think, as Susan mentioned, you see us, um, even subconsciously, the inclination is to join in and do those things again.
We did
Yeah.
in COVID, right? That's what we did in COVID. I think COVID actually prepared us for what we're living through now
Yeah.
because we had to find our soul. We had to ground ourselves when we were afraid and when we didn't know what was going to happen. And the uncertainty is always humanity's biggest fear. Like we want to know what's around the corner. We want to know what's going to happen next. And these tools, these innate tools of the arts and aesthetics help us to find meaning, find purpose, ground us. They do all these different things that nothing else does. And I think that's pretty extraordinary.
You know what you're saying, Susan, reminds me of the story that you both wrote about with Fred Johnson. And I mean, that's like one individual, and you're using the example of a collective community in Minneapolis right now. And in the story of Fred Johnson, I got emotional reading it because I just thought this is like his story really exemplified for me somebody who survived, right, and is now thriving and flourishing because of the arts. And can you maybe for our listeners just give a quick summary about his
Sure.
life and his story because it was so, like, against all odds kind of a story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember when he told us that story, we were sitting in my living room and I couldn't believe the story. It's so powerful. He was born in prison. His mother was incarcerated and he was taken away from her. And he was put into foster care as a baby. And
Mm.
from the very beginning, he moved and hummed and swayed, and people thought that there was something physiologically or neurobiologically wrong with him, but he naturally did this and hummed
Oh,
and moved.
interesting.
And as he got older, he started to sing, and and he ultimately started to sing songs that he didn't really know why, but they were the songs that comforted him. And fast forward, he ultimately became a musician, a very prominent jazz musician. He played with Coltrane and Miles Davis, and he also became what's called a jolly in the African diaspora, where he sings people's stories. And it's really quite extraordinary. But he ultimately was reconnected to his birth family now maybe 15 years ago, and he started. Mom had passed, but he started meeting his brothers and sisters. And he said, I always sing these specific songs. And they were like, what? And it turned out that they were the songs that the mother had sung to the kids. And it was in his
Oh,
DNA. And
oh
so
my god, I literally just got chills.
I know.
That
It's crazy. It's crazy. And so he really, from a genetic sort of biological evolutionary imperative knew. And, in the Black community, um, singing and swaying and dancing is how the Black community survived slavery. It's survived imprisonment, survived, bigotry. And he had that. It's so ingrained in him as a baby. He was doing that to
amazing.
self-soothe himself. And
Yeah,
if you think about your own life, we all have certain things that we do to self-soothe, right? That are these aesthetic experience, sensory experiences. I mean,
yeah,
you should talk about your drumming. Ivy drummed when she was a kid, which I thought was so cool.
yeah.
I drummed. My parents would be fighting, and I had to figure out I didn't want to hear them fighting, and so I closed my door and I would just start drumming, and my heart would get in resonance with the drum, and I would go into kind of a flow space and nothing
Yeah.
mattered anymore.
Yeah.
What they were doing didn't matter. So it
Yeah.
is incredible, when you think back how we've used the arts, even subconsciously, to heal ourselves.
Yeah.
But
That is so, I mean, gosh, it
but
really is amazing how on that DNA level, it really, like, DNA, cellular, all of it, just your whole body immediately tunes
Yeah.
into what is, I don't wanna call it right, but feels is natural,
Well, and
yeah,
right?
also the
we
environment.
know we know how to heal ourselves. I mean, I do a lot of work in subtle energy medicine, and the truth is the body is amazing. It contains a lot of the answers, but we can't even hear them because things have gotten so complex. Sorry,
Yeah.
you were gonna
Wow.
say.
Well, just as an interior designer, it made me think of environments, right? So
Yeah,
environments shape us and we shape
absolutely.
environments. And so if you're in an environment that's sterile and cold and there isn't someone, cradling you, what do you need? You need that kind of cradling and connection. And so he had to go inside to really find that. But we see that in every environment. There's an opportunity to create environments that really give you what you need. And it might be you need focus, or you need attention, or you need creativity, or you need calm. But I think we're always in a space. We're in a space in our head. We're maybe in a virtual space. We're in a space together right now. So, what's the culture of a space that you're creating? And we're learning more about the neurophysiology of space and how, for example, round spaces tend to be spaces that we find more comfort in as opposed to hard edge spaces. We really like to have the horizon in front of us because we want to, we're afraid of what's behind us, right? What's going to come and attack us. And so, we have these evolutionary imperatives around space.
Wow. I mean, Susan, I have to say, just take a moment, like, here to say, it's so what I when I reached out to you both, what I was so blown away because I just had no idea, I live in this creative world, doing things. I just had no idea there was so much science that had been developing and all this research that validates all these design decisions that I make or that creatives do and things that we kinda just
You got
and
there
then
first. You got there
but
way
even
before
but I
science.
think hearing you put words to it is so valuable because to be able to help everybody to understand, right? Because some people, it's harder for them to grasp a color and what the color means, right? But or like how you feel, but sometimes the pathway, I mean, everybody has different pathways to achieve an understanding, right? And some people
That's
feel it better than others.
that's a really important point. Is that it is not one size fits all, that we all
Yeah,
are so uniquely wired. And this guy, Anjan Chatterjee, created something called the aesthetic triad that looks at like where you come from, what you know, your unique sensory system, and then what you value, what's rewarding to you. And so
mhm,
at the center of those three things is your own aesthetic sort of thumbprint, if you will, and and you know that as an interior designer, you don't come and say, "This is the blue you should use." You ask them questions, right? And you say, you know,
exactly.
"Where are you from? What works?
Yeah,
What's your culture? What
yeah,
motivates you?" And really great designers don't lay on that. They evoke it from their clients, right? And so
yeah,
we're just
that's right.
helping to add language. And Ivy talks about this all the time. We are so intuitive and our intuition is always right, but we don't tap into it. And so I think that's another message here is that being able to feel comfortable tapping into that.
Yeah, two things I want to build on what you said is, interestingly enough, about the fact that when Susan reached out to me and said she had the science to prove what, after following my career, she's seen I believe in. First I said, "Oh, yeah, I know that. That's why I do what I do." And for
Yeah,
example, so do you, right? It's
yeah,
what we do. But then when she said, "But now without invading the brain, we have the science to show it," it was like, "Oh my God," we both said, "The world needs to know this." And
Mhm.
we just put it out there because it was imperative information. Um, and we both have a sense that, as you touched on, when you, um, if you don't have that intuition, but if you hear the science, all of a sudden you take in the information differently.
Yes,
You open up to
yes,
it. And so
yeah.
we've gotten so many letters about you've given me permission to make art again. You know, people who have been just shut down, and now that we proved that it's good for your health and well-being, it's just exploded and created this kind of movement. And the other thing I wanted to say was you talked about just being, and we were talking about how people have individual preferences. Susan and I, it was a collaboration between Google Design Studio and Susan's lab in Milan, did something called a space for being,
I'm
which,
so glad you mentioned that because I wanted to talk about that.
yeah, it seems relevant, especially being an interior designer.
Yeah.
But it was really the first time we gave the public the experience of feeling what neuroaesthetics actually is about, because we worked with Susan's lab, Google, and her lab, and developed um, a code in terms of the physiology, what has to be true. We designed a band that you would wear through the experience, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, that took different physiological signs like heart rate variability, skin temperature, etc. And then really had an algorithm of what would be the ultimate conditions to equal um, lack of stress or feeling at ease. And so we worked with an architect who did 3 different rooms. They were all living rooms, but each one we had a grid of the neuroaesthetic aspects, which are color, material, shape, lighting, scent, music. I mean, all those things are alive in our senses. And each of these 3 spaces were designed with intentionally very different attributes.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
in
Yeah.
fact in fact, in between each room, we had what we called a palette cleanser. You know, it was
Uh-huh.
a little gray room with gray foam. So
Uh-huh.
the metaphor was, you know, when you get sherbet in between a meal, a different dish, so
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
to cleanse the, what you had picked up in the first room. But the instructions were, we only allowed 10 people in the room at each time, no devices, no talking, just be. And the exhibition was called A Space for Being. And we said, you know, touch the textures, stare at the colors, inhale the scent. I mean, just be in the space. Don't talk to anyone, etc. And at the end, and so people were in it for like 5 minutes in each room. At the end, there was a band tender, not a bartender, but they removed the band and
Mhm.
they asked each participant, which room did you like the best? And
Mhm.
say room number 2, the second one, because I love the color blue. And then we would put the band in the machine that would download the information. And of course, because we're Google, we deleted it afterwards. But and we had it showed the algorithm coming to life in this beautiful watercolor that showed where your body was most relaxed or at ease between the 3 rooms. And in like over 58% of the time, the room that the person cognitively said, I liked the best because I like the couch or my friend has a lamp like that, was not the room that their bodies felt the most at ease or least stress in. And
That
then
is
they would
so
ask,
fascinating.
it was a
Oh my
perfect
gosh.
because then they would ask, well, but how could that be? And then we
Yeah.
that was an opportunity to explain that your body is feeling and taking in information all the time. And the two are not necessarily connected unless you intentionally get more embodied and connect. And then, of course, to Susan's earlier point, they would ask, well, what's the right room? And we'd say, no, there is no right room. The whole point is what is right for your body. Where does your body feel the most
Yeah.
comfortable? So we ended up having 3-hour waiting lines for people to have this experience, to give them this feedback. And it was a great way to start this dialogue. I mean, the book came after this experiment, but when we saw how people really didn't realize this, uh, and how useful it was to them, you know, it was a great success.
I that whole section where you there, you know, where you did that comparative and contrast of what they said versus what their bodies said
Mhm.
is really, I mean, it's so I mean, it really was thought provoking for me as an interior designer because even now, I've recently pivoted and I'm focusing more specializing in kitchens. And part of that came out of this, desire to be in a more crafted, curated, and is focusing on like this micro level of this crafted, curated space that is so deeply connected to each individual person's emotional connections to that space, their
Mm.
rituals, their even the nostalgia that kind of inspires them, and but all of it engages all the senses, right? The taste, the sound, the touch of, the type of materials, the food, all of it. It's and one household will have music blasting and they're dancing and they're cooking, and another likes it to be more, I'm just helping out here while mom's always done this thing and I'm creating my own kind of, traditions. But it's the kind of space where I've really been thinking, wow, how do I, as a designer, bring that kind of understanding and level of depth of understanding into my practice? But I,
Well, that's
uh,
a beautiful wait, I just wanna say it's such a beautiful space to pick to dive deep in because most people maybe wouldn't see it that way. They would go, "Oh, it's very utilitarian," but the truth is you're making things, right? That's the one place
Mhm,
in the house that you have to engage in the making process,
that's
and
right.
cooking is an art, and
Yeah.
so to create the conditions under which you can support that. And it's very individual. I have a friend that just fired their architect because he designed a kitchen and said, no, this is the layout. Which is that's not the way I move through my kitchen. That's not how I operate. And so it's so important, especially in the making space, that you honor, I think the future of interior design architecture is not just, it used to be what needs to take place in this space, right? The program of the space. And now it needs to be what needs to happen there and how do you want to feel in it?
That's
Um,
exactly right.
We just moved out of our house to replace our floors, and
Yeah.
so we took everything out of our house. And when we went back in, the first space that we repopulated was the kitchen, and then
Mhm,
it was the bathroom, and then it was
mhm,
the bedroom, and then it
mm.
was everything else. Because you start to think about what are these primal things you have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to care for your body, and so it's really, when you think about what is important for you as a human, coming back to your first question. I also wanted to add that we just launched, Ivy and I have been involved in a project called Intentional Spaces, which is a global subfield of neuro arts to really develop a strategy to bring neuro architecture and neural spatial design into the world, into for designers, for contractors, for developers, for researchers, for policymakers, for urban design. We just launched the roadmap this week and with the Global Wellness Institute. And it's a wellness issue. Space is
Yeah,
really a wellness
that's
issue.
exactly right.
We've never
Yeah.
thought of it before. We've always thought about it, as Ivy said, as function, but it's really about how you heal and grow and learn and thrive. And so I, I'm very excited about the interest in this from people who are already have money in the pipeline, right? It's happening anyway. So how do you take those dollars and make them more cost effective? The goal of humanity's wellness, not only revenue. And I think those are not mutually exclusive.
and
Yeah.
sometimes I think we have to go back to move forward in terms of in ancient times, Pythagoras's time, if you wanted to be an architect, you had to also study medicine and be a philosopher because you had to how the body moves through space and the effects of it. So they knew in ancient times the holistic perspective and the impact of space. And then we just shed all that and started to specialize as opposed to seeing the whole picture and the whole human.
Well, and I love what you're saying, Ivy, because it's really, and this is kind of where I've shifted in the past, you know, 7, 8 years into my own mindset of we've become so, I mean, and specializing is great, but we've become so specialized that we're in these like silos that
Yeah.
we've disconnected from this kind of the bigger picture of the system and the holistic picture of what makes a human being, right? It's mind, it's body, it's soul, it's our spirit, it's all of that. And that inevitably has to translate into whatever it is that we're doing, right? And in our jobs and in our personal lives, in for me, in especially in how I'm, connecting with my clients and trying to understand, how they live. And even I'd say, I mean, and you kind of touch on it a bit, Susan, as well, with the wellness part, with um, you know, interiors especially, people are inside these buildings, their whole lives. And we're just now starting to, well, not just now, but there's a lot of research coming out about the chemicals and the air that we're breathing and the quality of light and what that does to transform productivity and, just a healthy mindset and well-being, right? So it's not even just about like this luxurious spa life, but it's this day-to-day healthy living that we're trying to really, that I feel like, I've become much more missional and purposeful in that way. Um,
Well, in the book, we interviewed 100 different people, and one of them was E.O. Wilson before he passed away. And he reminded us that 99.8% of the time that us humans have been on this planet, we've lived in nature. It's only 0.2% that we've lived in the built environment, which has been a
yeah.
big experiment. And you could say we have failed in some way because, this was an experiment from
Mhm.
humans. The species called humans have been living in nature for 98.8% of the time. 0.2% we've been inside in environments. And now we've experimented, and we need to take a moment and go, is it working? What isn't working about it? uh,
Yeah,
it's really important.
absolutely.
I think
Yeah,
I was going to say, a lot of this shift from interdisciplinary, multiple kinds of curious ways to be in the world really
yeah,
shifted around the age of reason. And in
yeah.
hindsight, the age of reason is so unreasonable. like, like
It's so true. It's so true.
Yes, doesn't make sense, which is
Mhm.
funny because it was about common sense, right?
Yeah,
And so I think, it pushed out curiosity, pushed out wonder, it pushed out awe. It really did silo us. And now, even though there are many languages in the world, different silos, different fields have different language to describe the same thing. So it's word soup also. So we don't know how to talk to each other about common things. And that's another thing that I think is really important, is to really start to think about common language and common North Stars around what it does mean to be human, and how we need to think about that in different ways. And you can't not talk about salient sensorial experiences, which
yeah,
equal arts and aesthetics, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, just really quick, going back on what you said, Susan, with the age of reason, I thought of this story just popped into my brain, which is a book that I love, actually. It's The Little Prince by
Oh, love
Samuel
that book.
Hunter. And I thought of the part where the pilot is narrating how when he was a young boy, he drew a picture and asked all the adults in the room, you know, "Are you scared?" And they were all saying, like, "Why would we be scared of a hat?" And then he says, "It's not a hat, it's the boa constrictor that ate the elephant." And then they're like, they're obviously confused, so he redraws it showing kind of a section, the interior of the snake with the elephant inside of it. And they're like, "You just shouldn't be drawing elephants and boa constrictors, like, don't do this kinda thing. Focus on math and, like, reason," right? And it takes and it just for me, I remember how that, I mean, obviously, I'm recalling it now. It was so true, and I remember feeling that there was this resonance of, "I know what that feels like," you
Yeah.
know? And I and I guess that kind of is probably a good segue into, what do you can you maybe define for the listeners, what is this aesthetic mindset that you talk
Mm.
about a lot about in the book? And what do you think how do you think we go back to that place of, you know, what I was just describing, that childlike imagination and that wonder that kinda got squashed, by reasonable adults, right?
where you start with where you are. I think that's the first thing that's really important. You don't have to boil the ocean. And another really important takeaway is you don't have to be good at any art or aesthetic experience to have
Yeah.
significant impact. And I think we all think that we've been told that if you're not good at it, it's a waste of time. There's no value in that, which of course we now know is totally not true from a neurophysiological or biological perspective. But the first thing is what we're talking about right now, which is curiosity, having that sort of beginner's mind. And around the same time of the age of reason, curiosity killed the cat, right? We were told that if you're curious, something really bad is going to happen to you. So don't be curious either. That's just not good. But curiosity, which is both Ivy's and my sort of bumper sticker, is
Uh-huh.
curious or die, right? Like being curious is critically important. And then the second is
Yeah.
playful exploration. And Ivy, you explain playful exploration because like your word.
Yeah, play. Well, I was on believe it or not, there was an actual international board of play, and it was started by a scientist years ago. I love his definition, which is play is doing something different than you do every day, but without a determined outcome. And
Yeah.
that's key because we are so outcome driven in our lives. Because, as you said in the beginning, we're doing, doing, doing. And
Mhm.
the reason children are creative is because they will pick up a cardboard box, put it over their head, it's a hat, then draw on it, it's a TV set, and they have no end goal in mind. They are just literally engaging their
Yeah.
mind and their senses. And so even in having run corporate design teams my whole life, I always try and integrate some play or playtime, because that is, and we have to get back to that as
Yeah.
adults. We must get back to it. So that's
Yeah.
one of the ingredients in this aesthetic mindset. And then Susan, you want to do the others?
Sure. The third is really tapping into your sensorial systems and learning more about sensory literacy. So,
Yeah.
what's the temperature in the room? What's the smell? Touch. We have so many touch receptors. We have so many sensory receptors that are always bringing the world in and to really create those synaptic connections. And we forget them, right? We completely forget them. And then the last is being both a maker and a beholder. And the truth is, we're makers and beholders all the time, right? Right now. This is a improvisation. We're improving. I don't know what you're going to say. Ivy doesn't know what you're going to say. Blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And so when you're a maker, you have an opportunity to understand yourself and affect your sensory systems, but also your vestibular system, your respiratory system, your immune system, your cardiovascular system, your muscular system. You can choose to share yourself, that your creative expression, but you don't have to, right? That's where agency comes in. As a beholder, we have a huge opportunity to be able to understand the other at an unconscious level, right? When we're experiencing theater or music or even nature, right? We have these experiences that we can then assimilate with empathy, with compassion, with perspective taking. And so this dance between being a maker and a beholder is really important for how we transcend, right? How true transformative things happen for us individually and as a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, and also as a society and species. So
Yeah.
it's those are the four things. And as I said, you know, in the book and also on our website, there's a little index that you can take. It's 14 questions that basically gives you a sense of where you are on your own aesthetic mindset. And it breaks it down into a couple ways to sort of see, where are you more of a maker or a beholder? Where are you like not tapping into playful exploration? To give you nudges, gentle nudges to say, hey, give this a try, see how this works for you. And people write us all the time. People send us stories every week. And amazing the discoveries, no matter what they're coming from or what they're addressing, how these different aesthetic mindsets are really valuable, and they're not hard to do. Right? It's not like
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
more time in your busy schedule.
And
I mean,
we've always
everybody needs to just get the book because you give so many wonderful examples of how to tap into all of this and yeah, but what were you gonna say, Ivy?
well, we've always known that sometimes big trauma will shut down the Broca region of the
Yeah.
brain, so you can't speak, but you can always express. So people might draw how they're feeling, But now we all have micro traumas, I think, every day, and they just keep piling up on top of each other. And the arts is such a great way to just let that out. Like, even if just, as Susan said, just write how you're feeling on a piece of paper and then throw it away and rip it up and throw it away. That lowers the cognitive load just by
Yeah.
putting it on paper. Um,
Yeah.
or to come home, and we have people write us that say they started art date night, where they, each couple is responsible each week for coming back to their house and just having little watercolor sets there with a glass of wine and just experimenting with watercolor. Like, not, if you take the judgment out of the arts, and just look at it as I'm playing and I'm expressing with no judgment.
So it's so true. And it's interesting because we're so harsh on our own selves and we're so quick to criticize our work, and even just rewiring that way in which how we speak about the things we make is so important. I remember, a few months ago I participated in a doodling workshop,
Mm,
and and I mean, I draw lines for, draw the make the furniture look like this, or, here's how I want the interiors to look. But just to doodle and like let it be like a free way of how I'm just allowing the lines to be expressed on the paper. It's funny, like when I first started it, it had been so long since I'd been in that state of mind that I was like, "Oh, what am I doing here? Or this looks all squiggly and this doesn't look right." But I was like, "This is doodling. Just let it go." And then it started to just come out and it became much more natural. But um I was wondering, Susan, actually, I wanted to go back to something you said about connecting neurologically and through the senses. Can you give some examples of why that is so important, that we're like just even neurologically aware of how the senses connect?
sure. Um, so I guess I want to come at it from two different directions. The first is each sense does something very unique. So, touch allows us to really understand texture and temperature. But also, what happens with touch, like think of it when you hold someone's hand that you love or you hug someone. Um, there are touch receptors in your fingers. There's over 3,000 touch receptors in each finger. Um,
In each finger.
each finger. There's over 4 million on your whole body. And
Oh,
so they
wow.
turn over very rapidly. So you're always
Yeah.
renewing these systems. So what happens is, let's say you're holding someone's hand, that sensory input comes through the thalamus to the somatosensory cortex and releases a neurotransmitter called oxytocin in this case. You immediately feel connected to each other. So just, so many people are not hugged with permission or hugged at all, right? We
Yeah.
have such a
Yeah.
connection there. Sound reaches you in just 3 milliseconds. So sound and music are sort of the most immediate kind of sensorial experiences. And it's also why sound and music stay with us when we are moved into these neurodegenerative states as we age, because so strong they associate with different parts of the brain. So we actually hack and put them in different parts of the brain so that we can recall them in different ways. So each sense has an ability to be able to provide us with different content. But what's really important is, we're born with about 100 billion neurons, and those neurons connect at a synaptic level. So when you're using these sensorial salient experiences, you're creating more synaptic connections, which are creating more neural pathways. So you have quadrillions of neural pathways in your brain, and they connect to the vagus nerve, they connect all these different systems within your body. You want to have a lot of neural pathways because as you age, they start to prune, and you want to be able to have that volume, which also creates resiliency. And the second thing that's really important is that these different functions within the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the motor cortex, the cerebellum, the spinal cord that goes through your whole body, these neural pathways are the things that connect all of those. So when you're doing these arts experiences, your brain gets bigger, which means there's more room for more neural pathways, and the conductors around these neural pathways is called myelination. It's
Mhm.
like the tube around your electric cords, right?
Yeah,
If that
yeah.
wasn't there, things would be all like crazy. They get stronger. And so that means you're thinking faster and better, and you're connecting these different parts of the brain together faster and better. And there is nothing that creates stronger neural pathways and increases this sort of structure, function, and neurobiology than arts and aesthetic experiences. So they're incredibly powerful neuromodulators. And it's sort of extraordinary that we have not exercised this for disease states, for learning, for community engagement, for conflict.
Exactly, yes.
It's
It's
amazing.
it is
It's
amazing. I
too
mean,
simple, right? It's
I
too simple a solution, which is why we haven't used it. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, yes. I mean, it's just, like, it's mind-blowing to me, honestly, and
Oh, can I tell you one
it's
more
like
thing? Let me tell you
yeah,
one more thing. 'Cause I
absolutely.
thought about this yesterday. This is a hypothesis idea. I haven't even shared this with you yet. Um,
okay,
Hot off the press.
yeah,
men,
you're witnessing it. You're witnessing it. Okay.
men die earlier than women, right? And what if the reason men die earlier is men do a lot less arts and aesthetic experiences than women do? So, what if arts and aesthetics
Oh,
men's health issue? And if it was, we would have policy, we would have more funding, we would have things that the men are controlling, right? Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
anyway, that's my new hypothesis.
All right, let's
I
go
think you're
prove
onto
it.
something
Yeah,
there.
let's
What do
go
you
prove
think,
it
Ivy?
right or wrong. Let's find the
Yeah,
truth in that.
I think it's true.
Um, well, and it really is astounding to me that we haven't tapped into the arts in this way more because we are just in this like collective state of, you know, experiencing so much instability, uncertainty. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, and, on a macro level, on an individual level. And I just love how, there's a phrase you shared. I don't want to screw it up, but it's about the arts creates community, community creates culture.
Arts
Was that
create
what it was?
culture, culture creates community, and
Okay.
community creates humanity.
Yeah. And it really is so all-encompassing, and to think that we just have always thought that the arts was just this extra, like, "Oh, it's an unnecessary thing," and somehow in that philosophy, we've completely severed ourselves off of, like it's almost like we've just cut off our right arm,
I think
or
when
like
we commercialized it, right? We commercialized it and took it out of our natural kind of birthright and said, "Oh, you pay for it in this way," versus it's something we need to build into our routine, like sleep and eating, etc.
yeah, yeah. I mean, 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, whatever it takes, right? Just to engage with it. I mean, I shared with Susan, I shared with Ivy that my husband, at the start of the year, we decided to create like a calendar, a month. Every month, we're going to do a fun activity of awe. And it's just practicing that and kind of being intentional about practicing life through those eyes has been so transformative for both of us. And so much to what you all are saying here. I wanted to maybe ask you, just as some closing questions, about how you both continue to stay engaged in. I mean, what are you doing to nourish your artistic soul?
Yeah, I've got to hop off now, but my final, what I would
Okay.
say is, luckily in the job I'm in, I feel like I get to do that every day, but I make sure I've been into sound and vibration, and I have a sound studio with tubes that are aligned to all of our frequencies, and I play in that sound studio, and it's my way of
Amazing.
taking me to a different place. And I feel my cells being nourished and being rearranged. So that's what I do.
That's
I'm just saying,
amazing.
I'm an expert singer,
Ah,
and I'm singing all the time, and it's fabulous.
I love that.
It's
Well,
really
you're both I think, just having this book out in the world, like I said at the start, I mean, everybody needs to pick up a copy of it. It is a life-changing book to read, and Thank you both so much for the contribution you're making to help us all become more fully human. And thank you both so much for your time. I know you're both extremely busy, so I'm so happy that we were able to have this time together.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to join our creative tribe. Follow, like, and subscribe to help this community grow. Your support helps me to tell the stories of the creatives who bring soul to our world and create meaningful experiences. Thank you for being here and keeping the circle of creativity alive and connected. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you.